Hello and welcome to Playback, Tier 2 World's weekly showcase of our best stories from around the globe. Coming up, a political and humanitarian crisis is brewing on the Belarus-Poland border as thousands of migrants look to enter the EU. The world's two worst carbon emitters, China and the US, make a surprise commitment to tackle the climate crisis together. Ethiopia detains dozens of UN staff and drivers as concerns grow over a worsening civil war with Tigrayan rebels. And we visit Jakarta, the fastest sinking city in the world, where residents are digging deeper even as water level continue to rise. Thousands of people are camped out along the border between Belarus and Poland, suffering freezing temperatures and little access to food or water. The EU has accused Minsk of using the migrants to deliberately cause a crisis among neighboring democracies. Melinda Nusafora reports.
From the air, this sprawling migrant camp follows the barbed wire borderline for kilometres. On the ground, children gather at the fence, chanting for water. For weeks, thousands of migrants from Africa and the Middle East have been camped out on Belarus's border with Poland, looking for a way into Europe. Belarus is accused of facilitating the crisis and pushing migrants towards Poland. The European Council has called it a hybrid attack and says Belarus can expect retaliation from the EU.
I would like to be very clear. Possible sanctions are on the table, are again on the table. And we want to make sure that we coordinate with all the member states in order to make the best possible choices and to identify what are the best possible tools in order to be effective. It must stop this hybrid attack against the EU, not only against Poland, against the EU.
But Belarus's president says responsibility rests squarely on the West.
You imposed sanctions against me, against Belarusians. You went for a hybrid war against Belarus. And now you want me to protect you from migrants and other things? It's not logical. You created the problem. Face it.
At a meeting in Moscow on Wednesday, Belarus turned to its ally Russia for support. Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov says Russia has sent strategic bombing aircraft over Belarus to monitor the situation.
Cooperation in countering the anti-Belarusian campaign launched by Washington and its European allies has moved forward quite effectively. We are closely coordinating our approaches.
Poland says 30,000 migrants have tried to cross the border illegally this year, and more than half of those attempts occurred within the last month.
The border between Poland and Belarus is a border between a state that follows the rules and a state of lawlessness that uses people as living shields in order to force certain behaviors.
Poland has quadrupled its number of border guards, and the parliament has approved the construction of a 400-kilometre-long border wall. It's expected to be finished by the middle of next year. Aid agencies are warning the situation could soon become a humanitarian crisis. At least 8 people have died from exposure in the past 2 months. And as winter fast approaches, it's feared that number will rise. Melinda Nusafora, TRT World.
The United States and China say they will work together to limit emissions and meet climate targets. The surprise announcement came after British Prime Minister Boris Johnson urged world leaders at the COP26 summit in Glasgow to unite around an agreement. Suhail Damouni reports.
The British Prime Minister Boris Johnson has returned to Glasgow on Wednesday, hoping his presence will deliver a new wave of momentum as the conference nears its climax. The negotiators have until Friday to reach a deal that keeps alive the ambition of restricting global heating to 2 degrees Celsius, but ideally 1.5 degrees by the end of the century.
So my question to my fellow world leaders this afternoon, as we enter the last hours of COP, is will you help us do that? Will you help us grasp that opportunity, or will you stand in the way?
A first draft of the deal being negotiated has been released. It urges countries to strengthen their 2030 emission reductions target by the end of the year. It also suggests developed countries at least double the amount of funding provided to developing countries to help them adapt to the climate crisis. And it calls on nations to accelerate the phase-out of coal and subsidies of fossil fuels, although it doesn't set any time frame.
We are stronger believers that phase-out of coal deserves also a deadline. We know that for developed countries, the deadline for phasing out coal must be 2023, and for the whole world, 2030. So we are still hoping that a deadline could be included, because coal, it is something that it must be phasing out as soon as possible.
But that is something fossil fuel-dependent nations like Saudi Arabia are likely to push back against.
It is imperative that we recognise the diversity of climate solutions and the importance of emissions reduction without any bias towards or against any particular source of energy.
Developing nations are also hesitant to make further commitments until they have confirmation that developed countries will help them finance the transition to a greener economy and pay for the damage already done.
Frankly speaking, the wealthier part of the world has fallen short on its promises for too long. So one critical outcome of Glasgow will have to be an unequivocal signal that co-investing in this climate agenda is something that wealthier countries really take seriously.
With just days left to finalise a deal, it's clear there is a divergence among the countries on many issues. The conference president claims there is a spirit of consensus and cooperation, but can that sentiment turn into signatures before time runs out? Suhail Damouni, TRT World.
According to the UN, 80% of people displaced by the climate crisis are women and children. And women play a critical role in combating global heating through their management of resources, both in the home and in the community. Sarah Morris takes a look at a project in India that's empowering women to defend their environment.
Every species plays a vital role in keeping the equilibrium of one of India's last enclaves of biodiversity intact. But the job is a daunting one. Locals say encroaching human activity and increasingly erratic rainfall means 90% of the rainforest that once graced the UNESCO-listed Western Ghats mountain range has disappeared. That's why a group of 27 women has set up a sanctuary to protect and propagate thousands of rare plants and mosses that may otherwise be lost forever.
We use in this, all kinds of means of gardening and tools and techniques of gardening to preserve species from all over the mountains and even other parts of the world that are very threatened, especially by climate change. So just like a refugee colony of Syrians, for these plants coming from different parts of the mountains, this place you have to create a new habitat for them.
3 generations of women from local villages in the region have worked with botanists to build stocks in the sanctuary. They scour the mountains for endangered species and bring them back to the nursery, which they refer to as the intensive care unit. The goal is to rehabilitate, then multiply the plants.
Because of the climate change, if the plants disappear from the wild, then we have them here, then we can take them back to the wild.
The sanctuary, which was originally set up by a German conservationist 50 years ago, started off covering just 3 hectares. It's since tripled in size, and the women who now run it are seeing the fruits of their labour.
We have witnessed the birth of a forest, and that's a very powerful thing. Because there's old-growth forest, it comes into, once you just protect the land, it just starts to do its own thing, and the animals bring the seeds, and the wind brings the spores, and you see this forest just happening over time. It's just doing it itself.
These women are on the front line of the climate crisis, working to not just save mountain biodiversity, but also their way of life. And if climate campaigners in Glasgow get their way, Gender Day at the conference will result in more funding for women around the world to help them adapt to global heating and set up similar earth-saving projects. Sarah Morris, TRT World.
The civil war in Ethiopia has killed thousands of people, forced 2 million more from their homes, and pushed parts of the country into famine. As well as the enormous human cost, there are growing fears that Ethiopia's abundant religious and cultural heritage could be under threat. Claire Harriott reports.
Another victim of Ethiopia's civil war. This person was hurt in an airstrike in the Tigray region. A year of fighting has left thousands of people dead. As well as accusations of crimes against humanity, there's evidence of cultural crimes too. The Al-Najashi Mosque in the town of Nagash in Tigray was hit in April, to the dismay of the caretaker.
It's very sad, not only for us, but the whole Muslim community around the world is shocked because this mosque was shelled.
Heavy fighting in Aksum in northern Tigray felled these colossal ancient obelisks, which are a United Nations World Heritage Site. Fighters from Tigray have been pushing south into the Amara region and have taken control of Lalibela, another World Heritage Site. At St George's Church in Lalibela, so far there's no evidence of damage or looting, but historians fear it's only a matter of time.
Where there are conflicts, treasures disappear, get stolen or damaged. Therefore, our treasures are in danger at this moment because of this conflict. These treasures could be from the 4th or the 5th or even earlier centuries if a serious study is carried out on them. The treasures in our country are very ancient that we cannot find them elsewhere or replace them.
In a war which the UN says is marked by extreme brutality towards people, there are fears the country's historical treasures will be lost forever. Claire Harriott, Africa Matters.
Well, in Yemen, the conflict between the Saudi-backed government and the Houthi rebels has devastated the country. The UN has called the situation the world's worst humanitarian disaster. It's killed tens of thousands of people, pushed millions to the brink of starvation, and left countless others traumatized. But one center in the city of Taiz is trying to provide small relief for those in need. Sena Saylan has the story.
Munir Hassan was injured from a landmine planted by Houthi militias near the city of Taiz in southwestern Yemen. He finally regained consciousness after more than 1 month in coma, but found himself without legs or an arm.
My life in the past was a normal one. I didn't harm anyone. After the injury, I was so tired and my condition deteriorated. I'm so tired. I'm now without limbs. In the past, I didn't need help from anyone. I could do everything. I could go out easily. My limbs were active like horse limbs. But now I am disabled. In the past, I could go everywhere. Now I need help from people, and this artificial limb is so heavy.
Munir is not alone. There are thousands of people just like him who have lost their limbs. Most are innocent bystanders to the conflict, like Mohammed Said, a child who lost his leg.
I was injured by a landmine. I was taken to an MSF hospital, and they have treated me. I was walking to the mosque for Eid prayers. That was in 2015.
The war in Yemen has claimed lives of at least 233,000 people and left thousands others with permanent disabilities. The Prosthetics, Orthotics and Physiotherapy Center in Taiz is providing treatment and therapy for more than 5,500 people.
Here at the center, we provide services for all prostheses, whether they are arms or legs. We also provide sportive devices for spines, as well as crutches. Since 2016, the center has provided more than 7,000 amputees service. With regard to rehabilitation, we treat all kinds of injuries, such as injuries to limbs, hemiparesis, quadriplegia, spinal injuries, as well as brain injuries and bone fractures.
Employees at the center work hard to provide the best possible care they can to help ease the suffering of their patients. And like Yemenis across the country, what the patients here want most is an end to the war. Sena Saylan, TRT World.
Indonesia's capital, Jakarta, is no stranger to natural disasters. Massive flooding has become an annual and even monthly occurrence. As Vandana Nanwani reports, global heating, combined with bad local practices, have turned it into the fastest sinking city in the world.
Home to more than 10 million people, Jakarta has experienced rapid development in recent years. but it has also felt the harsh impact of the climate crisis. Sari Handayani has to renovate her house in South Jakarta almost every year due to flooding. She's seen waters reach up to 7 meters high.
I always had a 2-story house, but now I have to make it 3 floors because even the second floor gets affected. The second floor was safe enough before, but now the extreme floors are getting out of hand.
But the rising sea waters aren't only a result of global heating. One of the main reasons behind Jakarta's rapid sinking is how the locals get their water. Now, the extraction of groundwater is done using a pipe that goes deep into the earth, causing the soil at the bottom to compact and collapse, and the land where I'm standing to sink. Times this by 1 million, and you get 25 centimeters of sinkage every year. Despite this danger, residents continue to dig more. That's because 24 million Indonesians still lack clean water, and this is their way to survive.
Actually, there are 2 things. One, because the regulations still allow you to extract the water as long as you pay for the groundwater tax. And the second thing is because the water company coverage hasn't really reached 100% of the total Jakarta area.
The government has come up with a $222 million project, which includes developing a giant seawall to protect the city. But critics say real solutions need to go deeper.
About the seawall, actually, if you see the plan, they call it NCICD plan. They only want to build the wall, but not necessarily address the problem of land subsidence.
Indonesia plans to move its capital to the island of Borneo by 2024. But experts say more needs to be done to lift the weight from Jakarta. Vandana Nanwani, TRT World, Jakarta.
Chemical fertilizers have changed the way food is grown and helped feed billions of people all over the world. But it's also now increasingly clear how damaging they are to the environment. And in Sri Lanka, attempts to limit their use is causing friction among farmers. Wilson Dysart reports.
This is the time of year these farmers usually spend planting crops, but instead they're in the streets. They're protesting a government policy implemented in May that bans chemical fertilizers and pesticides and pushes for a switch to all organic methods. Farmers say the change has pulled their lives up by the root.
We're traditional paddy farmers. We cultivate our land. The problem at this point is fertilizer. We're hoping we will get some. If we receive some, then we'll use it. But if not, we have no alternative. We have no knowledge of how to make compost fertilizer.
Young people don't remember the Green Revolution of the late 20th century, which saw the introduction of new fertilizers and pesticides that increased agricultural yields. But that technology has since become the basis for what they eat. Now, Sri Lanka's government wants to change all that in a single season. The sudden move has left both farmers and some researchers frustrated.
Thanks to Green Revolution, a lot of people talk about negatives. Fine, keep those negatives aside. The positive impact is that we are being able to feed our nation. Now this decision is going to reverse that, and that worries me. That worries all the scientists, based on fact and figures, based on science, not based on myths. That's why I'm against this.
The UN Environment Program says that chemical fertilizer and pesticide use can have negative impacts on public health, including the contamination of water resources. That's why Sri Lanka banned their use. And even as farmers burn effigies of him, the agriculture minister insists the ban has the support of the public.
So at that time, the right option was to ban that much of protest, right? The health sectors, all people, even everybody against.
Sri Lanka's farmers say that if the government wants them to keep the country fed, they will need more help than they're getting now. Wilson Dysart, TRT World.
After years of debate, France has returned 26 artifacts to Benin. The metal plaques and sculptures were stolen during the colonial era. The decision to repatriate the collection has renewed calls for all stolen artworks to be returned to their countries of origin. Hadia Al-Alawi looks at the efforts to bring looted cultural artifacts home and the challenges they face.
The debate around the repatriation of stolen artifacts acquired during the colonial era has been raging for years. Pressure is continuing to mount on governments as well as cultural and educational institutions to repatriate looted items. The decision by the Netherlands to hand back thousands of stolen cultural artifacts from former colonies is putting renewed pressure on other Western nations to follow suit. But despite these efforts to rectify any injustice that might have been done to the country's cultural heritage, museum conservators say returning items to their country of origin can pose problems.
They are very much engraved on the French memory as well, and a part of a common history. For me, it is a new episode in the history of these artifacts, a very tumultuous history.
In 2015, the British Museum said that it was in possession of a looted artifact from Syria and was hoping to return it once the country was stable again. This is a challenge faced by many countries who have had their artifacts stolen during times of conflict. In Iraq, for example, thousands of art pieces were looted from the country's National Museum following the US-led invasion in 2003. But this past August, museums in the United States returned 17,000 of those archaeological artifacts. One of these items was a 3,500-year-old clay tablet called the Gilgamesh Dream Tablet. On it is written part of the Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the world's oldest works of literature.
In coordination and cooperation with concerned parties in the US, it was agreed to return artifacts that were seized at the borders, those put up for sale at auctions there, and those that were collected from Iraqi archaeological sites via random excavations.
Another example is Africa. During colonial rule, tens of thousands of cultural artifacts were stolen and taken out of the country. Most famous among them are the Benin bronzes, stolen from what is present-day Nigeria. Private collectors are also feeling pressure to return artifacts. Last week, a German collector returned a collection of 13 ancient Mayan artifacts to Guatemala and Mexico. It came not long after a private collector in France returned a Mayan artifact to Guatemala. The leading treaty that helps prevent the trade of illicit cultural artifacts is the UNESCO 1970 Convention on the means of prohibiting and preventing the illicit import, export, and transfer of ownership of cultural property. In 2017, the EU and UNESCO created a special project whose primary aim is safeguarding the cultural heritage of Libya, Iraq, Syria, and Yemen. But many say the current measures in place are insufficient in curtailing the expanding trade, especially during times of conflict. While many institutions work together to combat the illicit trafficking of cultural goods, the road to restitution is tricky and will require extensive collaboration between the art market, governments, and individuals. Hadia Al-Alawi, TRT World.
During the COVID-19 pandemic, the U.S. shut down its borders to the rest of the world. Now it's finally lifting some of those travel restrictions. International flights have resumed, and as TRT World's Muttalib Erdogan reports from New York, there were a lot of excited travelers ready to get back in the air.
Hugs all around, much laughter, and quite a few happy tears. These were the scenes at airports across the US as Washington lifted COVID-19 restrictions for foreign visitors who have been fully vaccinated. Travelers arriving into the country are required to take a pre-departure test within 3 days of their flight and show proof of a negative result before boarding. The historic travel ban, which was imposed by former President Donald Trump at the beginning of the pandemic, has finally come to an end after 21 months. The unprecedented travel restrictions kept millions of visitors out of the United States from 33 countries, including China, India, Brazil, and much of Europe. Until Monday, only US citizens, residents, and small selection of other exempt groups have been allowed entry into the US.
We've waited so long, almost 2 long years to get here.
I think it's always great to boost our economy, the more people we have in the States. So it's a natural win factor for that, but I think even more important, again, is the family reunification.
I think it'll be a great opportunity for the city, being able to have more people come in, being able to see the sights. Tourism should shoot back up, so should consumerism.
Overland travel from Mexico and Canada had also been prohibited. The lifting of travel restrictions in the US is critical to the revival of tourism around the world and saw long-term rivals British Airways and Virgin Atlantic to carry out simultaneous takeoffs from London's Heathrow Airport. And with Thanksgiving and Christmas just around the corner, there has been a spike in bookings so that more families can be reunited with their loved ones. Muttalib Erdogan, TRT World, New York.
Well, that rounds up your week of news here on Playback. Stay tuned to TRT World for the latest stories.